In this video we're having a look at Sound Reactive WLED. So I've used WLED for a lot of my projects, particularly the RGB trampoline. I've never used this particular branch of the software, which is Sound Reactive. So whenever you make any noise, the light starts to it, because the little controllers that I use don't have the guts to drive the microphone or the processing power to interpret the sounds going into it. So for this project you will need something a bit more beefier, and I'm going to use a ESP32 to do it. So most of the videos you've probably seen, there's lots of videos around about Sound Reactive because it's an interesting tool to use, but I had some battles trying to get mine going. So if you've not been able to get yours going, this is probably the video to watch, because I go through the steps to prove that your microphone's working and your firmware is working and those sorts of things, and after which this video, hopefully, if you haven't been able to get it going, you will do. So let's get on with it. So the first thing you want to do is find out if your microphone is actually working. There's several different types of microphones you can use. I'm just using the Max 4466. It's a pretty basic analog microphone, but there's no way in the WLED UI that tells me it's working, so I don't know if it's working or not. So with the ESP32 you can just load Arduino sketches onto it. You check the show notes, there's a link to a sketch you can put onto your Arduino software and then onto the ESP32, and it'll give you an output to see whether the microphone is working. So we'll just do that now as a test. So here's our pretty basic code. So we just pretty much just cut this code off the page and then jump into our Arduino software and paste it. So I've just got a new sketch here and I'll just paste the code. And you'll need to sort of alter these pins to whatever you're using. I'm using pin 2 on my ESP32. And then we can just send it down to the ESP32 to program it. Okay, so it's all coded up now. So we just need to go to the serial monitor, serial plotter. And we've got noise here and it alters itself whenever I talk, so I can pretty much guarantee this microphone is working. So if you check that checks out, you're ready to move on to the next stage. Now we get to the point to write the firmware to the ESP32 to make all these lights work with music. And there's actually 3 ways to do it, and we'll go through those now. The first way is with this website. Some kind soul has put the effort in to create all the different varieties of WLED with the audio reactive and the sound reactive version. So there's 2 versions of this. One's a plugin which you plug into WLED, and one of them is a pre-built image which has the sound reactive feature as opposed to a plugin. They both sort of configure differently. I can't get the original plugin to work for me at all. It flashes, it downloads, but I just can't get the sound reaction to work. Whereas this other version I can get to work fine. So basically what you do is you choose which one you want to install, click on it, and then I agree and install. And it's going to pop up with a window depending on the security settings on your browser. For me here it does nothing, but on other computers it pops up with a window and gives me a list of serial ports I can connect to, and it downloads it from the web. It's a really great process. But for this computer, for whatever reason, it doesn't want to do it. The other way to do it is to use the official WLED, I guess it is, version. And a similar process, you just click on the download, choose Sound Reactive. With the plugin version, the benefit is you can get the latest version of the beta release and install the plugin. You've got the latest version of WLED with all the bells and whistles for the new version. Here it's built on a stable version, I guess, of 13.3. Click on that and then install. And for me on this particular computer, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't even try and bring up the window to install the firmware. So we've got the 3rd version, which is the version I copied in my other video, or this one of these videos. And it is using the espressif tool to install the firmware itself. So on this page here it's got all the links to firmware. So for the ESP01, my other video, you just needed the one firmware file. For this ESP32 you need a bootloader file and you need the actual firmware file as well. And they're both here, so you download again, everything's going to be in the show notes. You just download those two firmwares to your computer and then open up the espressif tool. If you don't know where to get that or any details about that, check my old video, but I'll have links in the show notes as well. So when you're going to install the firmware out of the browser, you load your bootloader firmware first just by clicking these three dots and set the address to OXO, and then for the actual Sound Reactive firmware itself, you load that in the second slot and start it at OX10000. Tick both buttons and click on start, and it'll go through and flash the firmware. So if you're having trouble with that web version based of it, web page version, this definitely works as an alternative. So just looping back to that original, the very first screen we looked at, if this doesn't work, you still might want to use one of these versions of firmware, because it's got all the hard work is done for you. The guy who did this needs an award, and you just click on only download bin file, and then you'll use that along with the bootloader file to flash the ESP32. So next up, what happens if it doesn't work? So if you've flashed your ESP32 and you've got there should be an access point that comes up down in your list of Wi-Fi access points, and it's not there and you can't see anything happening, you can still get some debugging information through a serial port. So the way to do that is to start up your Arduino software again, and then just start the debugger, the serial monitor from the menu, and it'll be, if there's a problem, it'll be pouring out information here, and that debug information might be good to put into a forum or Discord just to see if somebody can help you out what the details might be. So whenever it boots up, it'll do this as well. So if it boots up and it's sending out information and it's like this, it should actually be working. And this one's actually told us on here that the microphone is connected. So if I reboot this unit here, we can see it's firing out the information. The only thing to be aware of is you want to make sure the baud rate is set to 115/200, because that's the speed that this unit will run at when it's sending data out the serial port. If you have been successful, then when you go to your list of Wi-Fi access points, you'll have an extra one there called WLED AP, so just connect to that. If you've never connected to one before, it might come up with a password. That is WLED 1234. So it'll go and grab the captive portal and come back, and we'll be able to go through the configuration for the WLED Sound Reactive. So when we go into the config now, we've got this extra option here which isn't normally there for WLED. We go in and we set these different microphones that are available. My one I've got is just a generic analog. I select that in the input pin that I've plugged it into on the ESP32, and we've got all these squelch and gain things on the website. There's some, for each microphone there's some sort of best settings that some people have come up with for their particular microphone. It might be different for yours, different manufacturer, that sort of thing, but at the moment for me these all seem pretty good. One more thing to note is in the memory of this ESP32 there is a section which holds your firmware, and a section which holds sort of things for it to remember, like access point names, settings, defaults, and those sorts of things. So if you've, for the people who can get it to work through the web browser, it won't be a problem because it automatically erases all the information. But when you're using the espressif tool, it just flashes it and keeps the original settings, but there is an erase button. So click on the erase button and then try and flash it again if you're still having trouble. Okay, that's pretty much sums up the video. Hopefully if you're struggling with Sound Reactive WLED, I've given you a few pointers to get you up and running. At the beginning of this video I mentioned that the little Wi-Fi controllers I use are a bit gutless to run this sort of version of the firmware, but there is a really cool setting in the ESP32 which will actually help us get that up and running. But that's for my next video. Aside from that, thanks for watching. Well, you made it all the way to the end. You should definitely subscribe, and YouTube thinks you'd like this video next.